limit on her strength. She said that she had misinterpreted his quiet as a sign of apathy when, in fact, it was sometimes just his inability to identify the thing that frightened him. He requested that she teach him how to name it without assigning grades for his initial tries. She requested that he demonstrate her effort despite the ugly outcomes. Their shoulders drooped little and their gaze softened. Reconciliation was not what it was. It was the taking out of superfluous armor, a clearing where a way could be possible. However, a possibility is not a guarantee. Like a jet circling a runway, the idea of Puerto Rico lingered. She clarified that although she might still travel, she might do so to take a breath. He inquired as to what she wanted him to accomplish in her absence. She requested that he begin with the minor things that were everything but little. Rescheduled a meeting that normally took precedence over supper and give the therapist a call. Tell when the kitchen was closed, the buddy who likes stirring the pot was there. He promised to carry out such actions. He inquired as to what she would suffice. She promised to switch off her phone after 9 o'clock, cease looking for evidence of her worries in the loudness and instead, then waiting for him to guess incorrectly, write down what she truly wanted from him. Both of them nodded in silent accord rather than ceremoniously. Sort that is genuine without the necessity for witnesses. Mendeecees reached for the bill first when it arrived, not out of custom but because he had to finish a task without discussion. For the first time that afternoon, he steadied his hands and slipped his card inside. "Yandy," she murmured. "I don't want the public to win," as she gazed at him, exhausted yet present. He laughed, not at her, but with the despair of someone who had finally realized how big the competition was. She said, "Then let's not stop." He stated, "The public only wins if they stop talking in private." People stood, not. They stepped out onto a day that looked exactly the same as when they had in, despite the fact that nothing felt the same. They were quiet next to each other, but not apart either. Their movements matched, and the light outside had changed just enough to lengthen the shadows. The sound of two persons motionless, measured, and quiet choosing what and how to preserve. There was a peculiar stillness in the air outdoors, the type that follows a storm yet retains the smell of rain. Mendeecees and Yandy moved cautiously along the pavement, neither hurrying nor dragging, as though they were worried that going too quickly might shatter the delicate. They had just discovered a rhythm. They walked shoulder to shoulder, carrying the burden of unsaid words between them, not holding hands but not drifting apart either. Them. The conflict between Yandy Smith and Mendeecees Harris is bursting louder than ever, and fans everywhere are left wondering the same questions even if the cameras have stopped filming. Urgent query. Is one of the most famous couples in love and hip-hop ending? In a startling development, tensions that even the most devoted followers never anticipated are revealed by rumors of a furious lunch confrontation. Imagine entering what ought to have been peaceful discussions over beverages, only to have tempers erupt over the most trivial issues. Words pierce deeper than anybody imagined, and feelings erupting like a tempest, eager to ingest all that stands in its way. According to insiders, Yandy has had enough of battling by herself and has reached her breaking point. Although Mendeecees, who is aloof and defensive, is torn between keeping his marriage intact and leaving. Their relationship has changed from being affectionate to being tense, from loving to explosive, and it has caused a rift among fans, family, and friends. Was this merely another heated dispute, or are we seeing the disintegration of a partnership formed in the most illuminating but merciless of circumstances? Watch closely because what happens next might make all the difference. The tension between Yandy and Mendeecees was too strong to be concealed by the restaurant's subdued hum. What should have been a straightforward meal swiftly turned into a spectacle that nobody at the table could have foreseen. Yandy sighed as she sat down, her eyes brimming with annoyance. And she didn't attempt to cover up the cracks in her voice for the first time in a long time. Almost to herself, but loud enough for others to hear. She leaned close and murmured, Mendeecees claimed to be reaching her breaking point and was caught. The tone was set by those remarks, which hung in the air like smoke, choking and lingering, was going to happen. Mendeecees, who always maintained a composed exterior, went for his drink as if her comment hadn't just hit him, but within his chest. The words were powerful. The facts could no longer be ignored or dismissed with a grin, or a light-hearted chuckle. This wasn't a light-hearted argument about what to watch on TV or a quarrel over housework. This crack, which had been gradually growing, was now visible in the light of day. Supporters who learned about this conversation through rumors and online snippets were shocked. unable to comprehend how a once unbreakable pair might suddenly seem so vulnerable. A woman renowned for her power is Yandy. Its capacity for stability showed a side that few had noticed. She acknowledged that she was worn out from always leading the battle for their affection. Always the one to bandage injuries that didn't seem to go away. She was relatable because of her honest confession. To everyone who has ever experienced intense love, yet felt that their feelings weren't being reciprocated. When she mentioned the incident that seemed to have occurred, the anxiety only increased. Almost insignificant at first glance. Water in a glass. She explained how something as insignificant as reaching for her May drink had become a source of contention and a representation of how brittle their relationship had grown. It may have seemed trivial to outsiders, but in that it was the spark that started a fire that neither of them could put out. With a confused and irritated look on his face, Mendeecees leaned back and said that was overstating the fact that little problems had been magnified into something they weren't supposed to be. But his remarks just made the rift worse. He seemed more defensive the more he defended himself, and Yandy wasn't in the mood to have her sentiments disregarded. She informed him straight up that she didn't feel love from the energy he had been giving her recently. It was not secure. It didn't seem encouraging. It was a combination of apathy and harshness. He made an effort to refute it, but the displeasure he was trying to hide was evident in his tone. Each phrase became like a stone that rose between them like a wall. Rather of drawing them closer together, each phrase distances them. This was more than one dispute or even simply over water. It was about sacrifices that went unacknowledged, about years of unresolved anguish, and about a love story that was put to the test in ways that neither of them had expected. When Yandy's voice broke, this time from tiredness rather than rage, the atmosphere changed. She informed him that she had not only been battling for them in secret, but publicly, against rumors from acquaintances, against family members who questioned them, and against a constantly guessing audience. "I said," she said. She felt as though she was on trial every time she entered a room, defending a marriage that didn't seem to be able to defend itself. Mendeecees gave a headshake, attempting to saying that he couldn't control the gossip and didn't care what other people thought or said. However, it wasn't the purpose. Yandy also ensured that he comprehended. She wasn't requesting that he dominate other people. She requested that he demonstrate to her that their relationship was worthwhile, deserving of defense, and worth working for. She desired to believe that they were working together, not as if she were alone with the burden. An image of two individuals who loved each other very much but couldn't manage to connect their hearts emerged as their voices soared and dropped. Online viewers of the encounter relived Yandy's statement that she couldn't continue to be the only one battling. It was a remark that struck a chord with many people and served as a rallying cry for people who understood what it was like to put everything into a relationship and yet feel empty. The online debate erupted in comments. Some people applaud Yandy for voicing her truth at last. Others arguing that Mendeecees was simply exhausted and defending him of ongoing conflict. Social media became a battleground of viewpoints that mirrored the couple's actual distance from one another. However, there were glimmers of vulnerability that suggested the possibility of recovery even in the midst of this tempest. Mendeecees, despite his frustration, he briefly dropped his defenses to declare that he was done fighting. He stumbled over his apology, demonstrating how unpracticed he was. He was expressing remorse. Although it wasn't a big show, it was a tiny rift in his armor, suggesting that perhaps he still secretly want to cling to what they had. Although Yandy heard it, it was insufficient. She needed more than a brief expression of regret, and more than just words to put a stop to a fight. She required evidence, consistency, and action to support her claims. She wished to understand that she wasn't alone in this. He shared their desire to provide a caring and secure home for their family. It wasn't only the two of them that were at odds. Neither of them. Their children, their extended relatives, and even their fan following were impacted as it spread. The Yandy was troubled by the idea of their children growing up in a world where there were always fights. She expressed her want for their kids to witness a love-filled, stress-free household. Mendeecees was struck hard by that remembrance, and his eyes briefly softened as if the gravity of what was at risk had at last touched down. However, pride still stood in the way. Rather of truly accepting what she had said, he sidestepped and said that long before she even knew it, he had been battling from the start of their relationship. The back and forth became a dispute over who had given more, who had suffered more, who had sacrificed more. There was no winner in this cycle. There are just two individuals trapped in the never-ending cycle of old grudges. The question that followed completely altered the tone of the discussion. Yandandy's gaze swept around the table, looking for any indication of commitment, and inquired as to whether they required room. No argument could overpower the ensuing stillness. Men didn't respond immediately, and that hesitancy was quite telling. Yandandy said that the absence of a response was sufficient for her, leaning back with a hardened expression. The future of their marriage was on the line, and hope was on the verge of dying in that moment. Online viewers of this moment timelines were overflowing with startled responses. Some people are shocked that the pair who previously represented tenacity could be dealing with such uncertainty. It was as if the entire weight of their past had fallen on this one vulnerable moment, making the room feel heavier and the air thicker. The talk at the table continued despite the quiet. All it did was alter form. Following the break, Mendeecees claimed he was sick of defending every breath he took while folding his hands as if he were waiting for a verdict. He assured Yandy that he wasn't the bad guy that everyone had made him out to be, because he kept entering spaces where others had already made judgments about him. He claimed to have evolved into a guy who was ready for influence before anybody had a chance to speak, and to her, that preparation appeared to be distance. Yandandy paid attention, but her gaze slid toward the window. She was strangely reminded by the buzz of traffic outside how quickly things may change if you weren't prepared. "I've never asked him to be perfect," she said quietly. She hadn't asked him to come after the damage, only before the collision. He asked her what it meant to show up now as he leaned forward and rubbed his glass with his thumb to remove the moisture. With deep and steady breathing, she added, "It appeared to, in rooms that attempted to divide them, they initially selected their home. In rooms that attempted to separate them." The instant the air twisted once again as that line fell. Around them you could sense a crackle, the type that occurs when long-held emotions collide with reality. Yandandy said that she was worn out from hearing about him in public. She heard of meetings that never happened, and she smiled through murmurs that knew more than she did. Reached their dwelling area. In groups where her ring didn't appear to matter, jokes were spoken a bit too easily. He scowled, claiming that the world loved to add fire to any tiny spark and that rumors weren't proof. It wasn't about proof, she said. It was about faith. About not waiting for a fire alarm and instead turning to her as the smoke began to rise. Although he nodded, his jaw tightened. He said that there were other aspects of her that baffled him, judgments that seemed to be made alone. Motions done in the name of protection, but from his vantage point, it appeared to be exclusion. The door had never been locked on him, she informed him. His knocking had just ceased. They were no longer alone. Uninvited but inevitable, other names sneaked in. Puerto Rico now sat like a third chair in the center of their table, which is why Scrappy appeared. Yandandy explained that the purpose of the expedition was to distance, for work, for clarity, for air that could be different from the one strangling her here, for space. With a raised eyebrow, Mendeecees stated that distance had no one who refused to turn around was ever saved. "Perhaps distance didn't rescue you, but it did occasionally force you to be honest," she added. He inquired as to whether she wanted him to stop her from becoming the anchor she had been urging him to be. She addressed him directly, saying, "An anchor that it's a recollection, not an anchor, that only falls when the boat has already begun to float." His lips parted, as if there was a spark of pain, and he muttered that he detested the poetry nature of their issues, while their remedies remained unpaid and doggedly pragmatic. Their pals held views, and those thoughts reverberated in the pauses between their phrases. A straightforward toast turned into a half-joke about who was in charge at home on their most recent outing. It came from a tongue that knew better, and although it wasn't cruel, it wasn't nice either. He had laughed along, Yandandy recalled him. How his laughter had stamped down on her. "Every laugh is not always an endorsement. Sometimes it's armor," he remarked. "Armor worn for too long turns into skin," she whispered. He murmured, massaging his temples. "I don't want to be the everyone" person had modified a different version of him. He continued attempting to compose a draft, and he wanted her to see it. She informed him even now she could see it. And that's why it all ached. When love is present, disappointment isn't unfamiliar. The home keys belong to a frequent visitor. Timelines surged and phones lighted up all around the city. A tale that was a bit too personal was uploaded by a buddy who ought to have known better. Then all of a sudden, their lunch clip was like a bottle with a letter inside. It floats on the surface of the internet. Every syllable's tone was deciphered by strangers. Supporters wrote lengthy paragraphs vehemently arguing each position. After calling to express her prayers for peace, A cousin unintentionally disclosed that she had heard another report, which, like a sharp corner, folded into Yandy's gut. Mendeecees stated that he did not like to face a public trial once more. He wished to be heard in this place. She concurred. Nevertheless, the public trial had already begun. Emoji-filled verdicts and passionate reactions made the already noisy situation seem much louder. Both of them were aware of the irony. Them. Being observed threatened to destroy what initially made people care about them, which is why they were well known and adored. A waiter set their meal on the table in the silence between calls. Neither of them was hungry for gorgeous, but the platters looked lovely. Yandy added, "I used to love how he studied me while picking at a leaf. He used to set an alarm for her flights in the early mornings," she recalled. "Call me when you land." She claimed she missed it, but he wanted to be awake to say it. Not because she requested. Stability. With a sorrowful smile, he acknowledged that he missed the way she would put her phone away on Sundays and return to the sofa when a movie began. As if everyone could wait for the credits to roll. Somewhere along the line, he said, they both let parts of themselves to be stolen by the world. And where their fingers had been, there were now spaces when they held hands. Nevertheless, she extended her hand across the table, palm up, as though to demonstrate that hands might meet despite gaps. After reaching and hesitating, he put his hand in hers. It was a slight touch, yet it made the sharp object softer. However, the softness did not make the heaviness go away. Logistics were seated in the corner. Vacations, academic calendars. As if paper could keep individuals in line, their names were printed side by side at family meals and other gatherings. Yandy stated that she wished to shield the kids from whiplash, resulting from the type of turbulence that educates young hearts to anticipate abrupt declines. Menz concurred, stating that he never desired for their house to be a location where doors are more likely to smash than to open. He recommended therapy as a tool set rather than a capitulation. He claimed to be fed up with studying the most difficult subjects without a guide in real time. She gave a nod. She said that therapy only worked if their truth, rather than the fiction they put on to survive, came in with them. This was the first genuine yes she had given in days. He vowed to deliver his truth. Even the portions that made him feel ashamed. Even the behaviors that appeared difficult but were actually simply wearing boots out of fear. A separate truth fought for attention behind the pragmatic rhetoric. There was a dialogue with his mother that swiftly got out of control. Yandy kept reliving a chat. She felt disregarded and devalued. Who went overboard? He thought she had attacked. Words cut like cables. They carefully went over it again, as though the recollection were delicate glass on a table. Yandy clarified that she wished to avoid divisiveness. Alignment was what she desired. Instead of being the last to defend, she wanted him to lean in first when she talked. He acknowledged when his choosing a side was like cutting off a limb, so when the family became noisy, he became silent. Marriage asked you to grow new limbs, not cut old ones, she said. It instructed you to use both hands to bring the folks beneath your house. For once, he listened without offering a counter-argument. "I hear you," was all he said, and he allowed the words to have some meaning. Somewhere, a tiny change occurred in the middle of everything. The type of transformation that occurs when individuals begin utilizing whole sentences, not a miracle or a solution, rather than cliched expressions. "I didn't manage pressure well," he remarked. He acknowledged that he had underestimated her fortitude, presuming there was no time limit on her strength. She said that she had misinterpreted his quiet as a sign of apathy when, in fact, it was sometimes just his inability to identify the thing that frightened him. He requested that she teach him how to name it without assigning grades for his initial tries. She requested that he demonstrate her effort despite the ugly outcomes. Their shoulders drooped little and their gaze softened. Reconciliation was not what it was. It was the taking out of superfluous armor. A clearing where a way could be possible. However, a possibility is not a guarantee. Like a jet circling a runway, the idea of Puerto Rico lingered. She clarified that although she might still travel, she might do so to take a breath. He inquired as to what she wanted him to accomplish in her absence. She requested that he begin with the minor things that were everything but little. Rescheduled a meeting that normally took precedence over supper and give the therapist a call. Tell when the kitchen was closed, the buddy who likes stirring the pot was there. He promised to carry out such actions. He inquired as to what she would suffice. She promised to switch off her phone after 9 o'clock. Cease looking for evidence of her worries in the loudness and instead, then waiting for him to guess incorrectly, Write down what she truly wanted from him. Both of them nodded in silent accord rather than ceremoniously. Sort that is genuine without the necessity for witnesses. Mendez reached for the bill first when it arrived, not out of custom but because he had to finish a task without discussion. For the first time that afternoon, he steadied